Thanks for joining for another episode of the Renewable Energy Movement powered by Kigyo. And today we have Ilona Németh-Kiss. Ilona is Hungarian nationality, but has moved to Germany to work in the renewables division from a primarily legal background, whereas she's now working as commercial project director at Vattenfall. Anything you want to add to that, Ilona?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the name was almost correct. So Ilona Németh-Kiss. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. And yeah, thanks for joining. As always, it's nice to start at the very beginning. So yeah, maybe talk us through your kind of early days post-education and what you were doing and where, Ilona.
Yeah. So as you said, I'm a lawyer. I'm a Hungarian lawyer. I did university in Hungary, and then I worked as a lawyer for, I don't know, 7-8 years in Hungary, classic, like corporate real estate, these kind of things. And then we moved because of my husband's work first to Russia, actually. So we lived in Moscow for a couple of years. And then also because of my husband's work, we moved to Germany. So we live in Hamburg now. And this is where I came in contact with renewables and joining the offshore wind industry. How that came around is that obviously I was looking for work which I could do with my legal background. I mean, my German now is a little bit better. When we came here, it was 0, but it's also still not working quality. So I was also looking for something that I can do in English. So just to make it even harder. And yeah, it was a little bit of luck that I ended up with the first offshore wind farm that I started to work with. A friend of mine worked at the company, and then through him, I was informed that there was an assistant contract manager position open, to which I applied, and then went through interviews and got eventually hired.
I can imagine it was a really difficult transition, I guess, that from being a lawyer in your home country to suddenly working in a country where you don't speak the language, and I guess your legal practices or your legal qualifications don't really work as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was not easy. The legal part was actually the easiest, if that makes sense, because of course we are working with contracts, or I was a contract manager working with contracts that was sort of familiar. A new type of contract, a new type of industry, but that was not totally new. I mean, when you also work as a lawyer, you learn different industries, you have different clients, and to be able to really well represent them, you need to some extent understand how the business works. So from that perspective, I treated it as something new that I need to learn. But what was difficult is really the culture, both every day, but also the corporate culture. And I socialized in law firms, and that is a very different environment from corporate. Simply, I'm still learning it. I would say after 10 years.
What were the main adjustments that you had at that time? Was it culture between purely from law firms to industry, or was it more from kind of Hungarian into German?
I think both. So I mean, it is really hard to say what is really the cultural difference in terms of work, but it's just totally different work streams, totally different kind of problems, different kind of meetings, completely different approach, a different level of detail simply in certain cases. And then of course I think the culture, I mean the everyday culture, I think a lot of people know that who also move from one country to another. You need to restructure your whole life, basically, especially with 2 small kids. I mean, even that is just adding on top of what you need to learn.
Yeah, I can imagine. So when you first started as this assistant contracts manager, if you can just talk us through that a little bit, was that working with UK contracts? Was it working with international contracts? How was that?
The company I joined was called the Ep8 Offshore Wind Farm in Germany, and then basically was under construction already, and then these are FIDIC contracts that we are usually working with in offshore wind. So from that perspective, it was a contract under German law, but it is based on FIDIC, which is quite international and well known in the industry. But for me, FIDIC was new as well, so I had to also learn that. And then we basically how it's structured is that you have a contract supporting the construction of the wind farm, and it's split into packages usually. So you have a contract for foundations, one for cables, one for the turbines, and then if there is an offshore substation, maybe one for that. In some companies, it's more complicated because it could be split even into more parts, but I was essentially responsible for one, later two of these big contracts, which we call packages, and then work together with the project team on delivering this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And how was that? This was 2017, 2018 time, right?
Yeah, from 2016 onwards. Yeah.
So you were working directly for Vattenfall, the project. How was it set up with subsidies and things like that at that moment?
I was more working on the construction side of things, so not super closely involved with the subsidies. But I know that at that time, that wind farm still had the subsidy scheme. So, and it is a very successful wind farm. I see sometimes they win certain prizes of being the best wind farm in Germany. So, quite proud of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I suppose before we go on to your move into the Vattenfall, then purely on the construction side, did you work at all with in terms of putting the team together or putting the workers together, or was that all done separately?
No, that doesn't belong to me.
Yeah, cool. All right. So moving on to after working on Veja you then took the role working with Vattenfall. Is that correct?
Yeah. I moved on to Vattenfall. It was the same role. So contract manager, again on a wind farm, which was the Danish triggers flag. And I was working with the cables package specifically there to deliver that part of the wind farm.
And how did you find the change or the shift from your previous position?
Yeah, it was really, welcome from me, and also a really good time because on the Vejamatte we have finished construction, so it was already in operations when I spent a little bit of time still working with them, but I was sort of looking out for what could be out there again in construction, and then the Vattenfall possibility came along, so it was a really well-timed change for me personally.
Okay. And your roles that you've undertaken a few roles at Vattenfall, right? Contract manager, finance director, and now commercial project director. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the finance director was just for a very short period, so I'm a commercial project director
Yeah.
now.
Maybe we can spend a little bit of time on the different projects that you've worked at while you've been at Vattenfall.
Yeah, I've worked on a couple of things, but what I would highlight is really the Danish Triggers flag, where I was there from more or less FID-ish to the end of the construction. So that was really nice. And then the Hollandse Kust South project, which I was CPD already, so commercial project director, where I joined in the middle of construction. So I didn't do that from the beginning, but took it over from my predecessor. So these would be the two ones that I would really highlight.
Most recently, then the Hollandse Kust project. I think you mentioned in the preparation call that we had offline, it was in terms of size pretty huge, but also subsidy free. Is that correct?
Yes. So it's a 1,400 megawatt wind farm, which is actually two sites, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 they are numbered. And yeah, it's the world's first subsidy free offshore wind farm. And it was before COVID basically, or at least the major part. So it did not face the challenges that offshore wind is facing recently, especially on the supply chain side.
Yeah, maybe we can just kind of dive into a couple of those challenges for the listeners. So you mentioned newer projects since COVID have struggled with the supply chain side.
Yes, I think that's, I hope it's well known in the industry that it probably not only offshore wind, but I know in offshore wind, sort of the prices have increased. I think other construction industries as well. So since COVID, there was like a massive increase in everything, in materials, in ships that you are using, in everything basically. That puts some constraints on the industry.
And in your role as a commercial project director, like you mentioned, if logistics and shipping and raw materials are all up, how complex is that to manage and stick to budget?
If you have a well structured budget and a well thought out budget, then I think it's not so hard to manage. I think we have been really lucky, so we managed it quite well, if I might say so. We have seen some increase in some areas, mostly fuel prices, which is always fluctuating, but the most of the materials were sourced before the huge increases. So I think we have been really lucky with that. And for the newer projects, of course, the prices have increased. So now that is what they need to plan with. But we always have risks, of course, for material price increase and fuel price increase. And these risks we are trying to capture.
Yeah. And I imagine, especially something of that size, the period between planning and construction is so long that many fluctuations can occur, right?
Yes. I mean, some of these really you need to capture as risk. And then in some cases, you have, of course, mechanisms in the contract on how do you lock your material prices or fuel prices in, or is it totally following the market? So it can change from company to company on what the preferred approach is. And also, I would say contract to contract as well, because it also depends on what you can agree on with your supplier, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that you make some of these contracts, has that shifted as well since COVID times?
I would say there is more awareness in the industry in general, how big an impact these changes can have. So I think there is definitely more attention on these. And then both sides, I think both the suppliers and the developers really need to understand what risks are you willing to take, what certainty do you want to price in potentially, and what is the space that you want to navigate in. But again, it can change. So the appetite for risk can, of course, changes from developer to developer, and again, also from supplier to supplier as well. But
I know that Vattenfall have got a very, let's say, remote or hub-like structure, but you've obviously worked on German, Dutch, Danish wind farms. How does that differ, or are they pretty simple from a contract perspective?
I think so. The way we are working is that we have offices in 5-6 locations, and almost, at least in offshore wind, of course, the other areas might be different, but in offshore wind, most of the positions can be based anywhere. So it can be that your team is sitting in the same office location as you are, but it can easily be that they are sitting all over the place as well. So it is nice from a perspective, but it also is a challenge then to find ways of actually meeting people and working together. So when I worked on the Danish project, we had quite a lot of people in the Danish office and in the German, so the Hamburg office. So I would say most of the team was sort of divided between these two offices, and the team I specifically worked on a daily basis, they were mostly in Hamburg actually, so that was relatively easy. On the Hollandsee Kust, it was a little bit more all over the place, and then you need to sometimes travel to be able to meet. But also after COVID, I think, and it's probably not only with us, but in other companies, I think things even more shifted to working on Teams and in the home office than before.
I was going to ask that question next. Actually, was this, did Vattenfall always have this system in place, or did this come around since COVID?
So we had it before COVID as well, that we could work all over the place basically. So when COVID came, we shifted quite easily to Teams. For us, it meant that not only some of the meetings were on Teams, but from a point in time, all of them. So we had quite a lot of online meetings anyhow before as well. So it was, at least for me personally, was not such a big shock, at least.
Just, I suppose, changing the subject ever so slightly. I think at the time of recording this, we've only released one other episode with a female, although we have recorded some more. Maybe we can touch on that topic a little bit, because I think it's really interesting for people to hear. How have you found it being a female from Eastern Europe, coming to work in what is pretty male-dominated industry in Western Europe?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because coming from a legal background, I think at least where I have been placed, it was really both at the university and at work, it was really sort of even, right? So I never felt that there were more men or more women in the law office. It was sort of 50-50. And then when I moved to Germany, I think that was not so obvious to me that, how many colleagues are men or women. It did happen at the beginning that, I joined meetings where I was sitting in a room with 6, 7 men potentially. But because of all the changes I had, I think this was really not in focus for me. I was just trying to learn everything basically. And at Vattenfall, it is really also, I would say, balanced. So we have a lot of female colleagues also in manager, even executive positions. So it is, I don't fear that it would be super male dominated, at least not in Vattenfall. I know that in other companies, the ratio is a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome that Vattenfall find themselves in that position. Is that down to anything in particular, or?
So I know that we have diversity goals. So we have goals for hiring female managers and female colleagues. And I also know that diversity in general is really in the focus. And Vattenfall seems to really believe in the diversity of skills and the diversity of ideas as well. And they seem to feel that we are more productive that way. So it's not only just a corporate sort of slogan, but it seems that there is really belief that we can, that the diversity of people really then adds something to the picture. And it's not only men and female, but also we have people from all over the world, really. So it is quite nice. I think I've seen somewhere that in offshore wind we have around 40 different nationalities. So it is really nice to work in such a diverse team.
I know a lot of companies put in focus around such targets, but often struggle, especially as you go further up the ladder. But I think particularly at Vattenfall, a few of the really senior positions are held by females as well.
Yes. I mean, our president and CEO on the board, of course. Then we have the chief financial officer, then head of wind, also Katrin Jung. So we have a lot of women really in executive positions. These were just some examples, of course.
Excellent. Do Vattenfall do anything internally in terms of like a mentorship scheme or anything like that?
I'm not aware specifically for women. Maybe in the manager space, yes, but I'm not aware of that. But there are opportunities for personal development for everybody.
Yeah, really good. Where do you see the offshore wind industry going next, Ilona? It's obviously varies country to country, but yeah, what's your view?
Yeah, I have to say that I'm optimistic. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I know that there is a little bit of struggle now, but I also see signs of maybe moving forward and moving out of that space where we are now. But I think something has been started with offshore wind and the renewables, certainly, to move away from fossil fuels and to move away from polluting our planet. So, and I really think that, or at least hope rather, that the energy transition is going to go forward, and it has a momentum that would be hard to stop now. I'm optimistic, as I said, and I really think that offshore wind can add value to the energy mix.
Yeah, for sure. In when it comes to talking around solar or onshore wind, and even batteries, there's a lot of focus on kind of multi-utility projects and multi-utility resources. Is there a future in offshore wind for that? Does offshore wind fit into the same cycle, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely a talk about batteries, or can be a talk about batteries to place them somehow, and then also there is talk about hydrogen, to connect hydrogen to the offshore wind production. I think there is a general sort of nature of renewables that sometimes you have a lot of production and sometimes not so much, and you need to somehow balance that out, of course. So I would say there is definitely space for that in offshore wind as well. I mean, you transport the electricity onshore, of course, and then onshore you can find ways of storage easily. I don't think that should happen offshore, actually,
No,
because, constructing anything offshore is much more expensive and much more risky than onshore.
indeed. Um, just comparing a little bit now, obviously we've talked about your path into renewables and the journey that it took you. Just like looking back a little bit, what do you particularly enjoy about working in kind of renewables and the offshore wind sector now?
I mean, how I came to the industry was a little bit of luck, but of course it is a very nice feeling simply just to work on something that is worthwhile, I would say. It has an impact, hopefully, on our environment, positive impact, and also maybe our energy stability in the future. It's just a good feeling to be part of something innovative. And I think to me, somehow it was always somehow obvious that we need to find a solution, for fossil fuels and get out of polluting our planet even more and more. So it is somehow naturally um, an easy thing for me to work. And then I think all of us who work in such projects, we are just simply proud of the work we have done, and it's just a good feeling to see that the turbines are spinning
Yeah.
somewhere a couple of kilometers out in the sea.
Yeah, exactly. You're almost a contribution to the greater good, let's say, or it's the shift in renewable energy and renewable power from fossil fuels is not going to change. So it's a good time to be a part of it, I think.
Yeah,
And what would
definitely.
before we wrap up, I always like to ask a couple of similar questions at the end. What would you tell like a young aspiring Ilona, or maybe a young aspiring lawyer that is looking for a change in industry? What would you say for them today?
I mean, specifically for a lawyer, I think it is possible to change. I think you really need to decide on, do you want to do this? But I think it's getting harder and harder to get into the industry. So I think when I joined, it was part luck, but part of also people didn't know what it was. I think now people are specifically sort of trying to get in. What I'm happy that I've done is that I try to learn a lot of technical details as well. So I asked quite a lot of questions, especially at the beginning, and people were super nice to teach me. They even showed me videos and how does this work? How do we install the cables? How do we, just to get, of course, not an in-depth knowledge, but some knowledge about how the processes work and what should we look out for. But when I joined, I also took a huge step back. So from being a lawyer to become an assistant contract manager, I mean, I had to make the decision that, yeah, I see something here where I think I could join something where I was hoping I can develop, of course, and not stay an assistant contract manager forever. But I had to step back and make that decision.
Yeah, which is difficult to do for sure. I mean, I guess in your case, your hands were tied a little bit because you were moving to a different country, needing a new job. But for someone to make that step, let's say in the same location, is difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And then of course, if you take such a cut, then of course you take a salary cut as well, of course. And then if somebody has a family and a daily life and I don't know, things to pay, then they cannot always do that. So
Yeah.
for me, it was I had no choice really. So that was also part of that. In terms of what you would say to, like, just the gender aspect. So what would I tell ladies? I think just, don't be afraid. Just share your thoughts and yeah, just be yourself all the time. I think that's important.
Yeah. And I think you made a very good point at the a little about 20 minutes ago or so, and said, in your studies it was very much 50-50, or even maybe slightly in favor of females. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is that there are more higher education degrees completed by women than men globally. That's a fact. And then when you go into your first role, or you go into your kind of second position, the disparity is quite some. So I think that confidence thing is what actually a lot of young women can struggle with.
Yeah, and maybe there is a tendency, I mean, I think I was really lucky, um, that I've never felt that, I would not be listened to or treated seriously. But I know these things happen, and I think that's where we really need to then be conscious about, I don't know, not letting ourselves push, and then a little bit stick to, what we want to say. But I think I've been super lucky in this sense. I didn't really feel any negative, even if I was the only woman in the room.
Yeah, that's good. Like as you say, not everyone is is that fortunate, as it were. You also mentioned just a few minutes ago that plenty of people are now looking to join this industry. And so maybe it's a little bit harder. I still have conversations multiple times a week about how difficult it is to find kind of the right technical staff. Has that differed in kind of the teams that you're working in?
So I think there is certainly a transferable skills sort of question, because when I joined, let's say, then the team I joined, 70-80% of them have already done something in this area. They have been part of an offshore wind or some kind of a renewables project. So we learned from them, the new ones, sort of. But now I think the ratios are sometimes changing, and people coming from other industries, there are a lot of transferable skills, but there is also a lot to learn, because this is a special industry. And I think finding the balance there is what's going to be the key, because if you have a team that is mostly coming from another industry, then it's going to be hard to sort of find what needs to be done. But every team can include some people who are new, and then I think they can learn quite fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think it's why some companies find hiring harder than others, because if you're not willing to be flexible at all on topics like this, if you're not willing to go find someone that's got exactly the right transferable skills, but maybe not renewables experience, and take a chance on them, then you're going to make recruiting even harder for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but then there are sometimes, weird choices also, I would say. So you really need to look at what is transferable and what not.
Awesome. Well, I think that brings us to a close, Ilona. Thanks very much for coming on. Always, like you say, nice to speak to somebody with a slightly different perspective. Not had a great deal of guests specifically in the offshore wind sector so far. So I think this will be really well received.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure.